It's Sunday, the 20th of September, and I've just had the deep misfortune of seeing Matt Hancock on the television. It's enough to make you want to scream. After 6 months of bungling, 6 months of promises, 6 months of being told we're going to have a world-class testing regime, what do we see but abject failure? Yet at no point at all in this does Hancock ever admit any fault whatsoever. No, the truth is, the reason so many parts of England are now back in lockdown, and perhaps, who's to say, the rest of the country within 48 hours, it's all your fault. That's right, it's your fault. Not only have you behaved irresponsibly, but despite being encouraged to go and get tests, it's now your fault because too many of you have gone to get tests, and the whole thing collapsed last week. And now we learn from the Sunday papers that if you get a positive test and you leave your house, you'll be fined £1,000. Do it again, and you'll be fined £10,000. Now look, I don't want irresponsible behaviour, but £10,000, it seems pretty draconian. But here's the worst bit. Supposing somebody who's tested positive says they've spent some time with you, and you then get a phone call from our track and trace system. Now, of course, I know that's unlikely because hardly anybody ever gets rung by them because it doesn't work. But whether the information that's been given is accurate or not, you too, even though you have not got the virus or may not have the virus, you too, if you leave your house more than once, are subject to a £10,000 fine. And it's the same if you organise a big demonstration. Again, you could be fined £10,000. Oh, but if you want to go and desecrate the cenotaph, or vandalise Churchill's statue, or topple statues and chuck them in the dock in Bristol, or even wear paramilitary uniforms and march through the streets of Brixton, well, that's fine, because you can pretty much guarantee that nothing will happen to you. This is all bad law, bad policing, and utterly and entirely disproportionate. And it's the way these measures are brought in. You know, it's Prefect Hancock and a small group in Number 10 that have decided this figure of £10,000. They have done it without any parliamentary debate or scrutiny whatsoever. We are supposed to be living in a democracy. Actually, it's becoming increasingly like an elective dictatorship. In fact, the level of government control is so bad. Well, of course, the Labour Party support it. Angela Rayner this morning, yes, Labour's fully behind these measures. I mean, you'd think, the way the government's behaving, you'd think Jeremy Corbyn had actually won the last election. So we've opened up the country, we've sent people back to school, and now Baroness Dido Harding is surprised that the number of infections of people, the number needing to be tested, the number of people who've got sniffles. She's surprised the number is rising. Well, tell you what, it happens every single September when the kids go back to school. I would have thought it was absolutely obvious that this would happen, and yet they simply don't seem to understand. If you are elderly, if you have serious underlying medical conditions, if you are grossly overweight, it almost certainly makes sense with rising infections for you to isolate. But it does not make sense for the whole of the country to isolate. And I think we're at a point now where the cure is becoming worse than the disease itself. Just think of all those tens of thousands of cancer diagnoses that haven't happened. The number of people with chronic heart conditions who simply haven't been treated. And goodness knows what the effect on millions of people is in terms of their mental health, their well-being, domestic violence, suicide. It really is a list as long as your arm. And now, of course, as we go back into effectively a second lockdown, the spectre of mass unemployment becomes all too real. I know people who've had this and have suffered from it, but equally, I know lots of people who've had it and have barely even known. It's barely registered until they've had the antibody test. And the absolute truth is, we have got to learn to live with this disease. Like everybody, I'd rather it hadn't escaped from China, but it did. We've got to learn to live with it. Another second national lockdown. It'll be England to start, but the others will follow. Another second national lockdown will be a complete and utter catastrophe. Now, Boris, we're told, is going to speak to the nation on Tuesday. We expect him to announce a circuit break. That is just number 10 spin for a second lockdown. So I think the time has come for us to say loudly and clearly no to a second lockdown. Question is, what can you do about it? Well, this government operates far more on followership than it does on leadership. It responds to public opinions. It responds to polls saying that what they do is unpopular. In fact, we've seen more U-turns from this government than I've ever seen in my life. And I think a lot of MPs out there, particularly Tory MPs, are beginning to get a bit twitchy. They can see that support for their government and confidence in the Prime Minister is slipping away very, very quickly. So don't think this is a waste of time. It's not. Lobby your MP and ask two things of them. Firstly, to stand up loudly this week in Westminster and to say we must not have a second national lockdown. And secondly, to insist that rule by ministerial decree comes to an end and we get back to being a functioning democracy. None of these draconian measures, none of these measures, which, by the way, I don't think are going to work anyway, but none of these things should be done without full, open debate in Parliament and in the country. Just to find in the Sunday newspapers, you might be fined £10,000 just for leaving your front door is completely and utterly unacceptable. So please, don't just moan about it. Don't just grouse about it. Get onto your MP. Make them feel the pressure of public opinion. Thank you.